and welcome back. Today we have a special treat for you. I'm joined by Jill Fulton. Jill, thanks for joining me.
Happy to be here.
Jill works in our office. She kind of is behind the scenes, but she's our VP of Business Development. And Jill, I brought you on today because you just did a thing. You did an important thing in life. Tell us, what'd you do?
Estate planning.
Okay. All right. And so Jill, just for a little background. So while Jill doesn't have a formal financial planning, background as far as her training, education, she plays an important role in our office. And a lot of times it comes down to that perspective precisely of kind of what our clients have, right? Our clients don't have a financial planning background. And so we really rely on her to give us perspective about, what our clients want to hear about and what is useful and what is beneficial. And so you now having done this really important milestone of doing your estate documents, and I was here recently.
Mm-hmm. I'm still actually in the process of the last steps.
Still mid-process.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to have her on and kind of just pick her brain on what was the process like, and then kind of share your perspective on things you wish you would have known and all that. Before we jump into kind of the timeline of what you did and when and how and all that, I kind of want to start with why. Because I think estate planning is your will is something that people are vaguely aware that I should do that. That's an important thing. So what was it for you that really kind of prompted you to actually get it done?
So I think it's a twofold, because one, understanding what an estate plan was, because I kind of always thought you had to be pretty rich to need an estate plan.
Yeah.
But then having my son definitely was what kind of lit the fire for me and my husband. We wanted to make sure that anything happened to us, our child was taken care of, and that nobody had to wonder what our wishes were and where everything was.
So I think that second point is important, because I think a lot of our clients are the same way, which is like any big life transition, got married, had a kid, any other kind of a transition, it kind of prompts this reassessment of, are my ducks in a row?
Yeah.
But the first one you mentioned too, I think is also true. And I think it's the one that people don't really realize. So like, they don't even know what is estate planning and does that apply to me? But I guess, was it kind of just working in our office and learning more about it that kind of prompted you to know, like, oh, no, I do need to do this? Was that kind of what it was? Or?
Well, it was the video that you said, do you want to have power beyond the grave? And I thought, yeah, that's exactly it.
Okay. Right. Control from the grave.
Yes.
Control.
I was like, you know what? That sounds good. I do want
more
control.
Sign me up. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great.
So I'd say that it was watching your videos. And then I knew, Mark O'Brien, he always works with our clients with estate planning. So I had known that it was something that I should be doing. But it wasn't until, honestly, your NextGen series where you started breaking down what all was in an estate plan that I thought I knew I needed a will. I knew at least needed to start there. And then estate planning kind of is the whole mixture of everything that you'd want to have put together in case of your passing.
Okay. Yeah. I think oftentimes the will is the gateway drug, if you will, to people know they need a will, but really, I mean, honestly, one thing that will like prompt you to act is the other documents, right? Like a power of attorney, a medical power of attorney. So, okay, great. So you had these kind of realizations, this life transition, I got to get this done. Going into the process, I know obviously you had seen some of the other videos that we had done, but I guess how would you rate like your, understanding or knowledge before you went through the process, if that makes sense?
I would say I really didn't understand. I didn't even really know, like guardianship. I didn't know where that went. I didn't know if it was a will or if it was a trust, because I went the route of I did a trust, a living trust, and not everybody needs that. But I kind of had thought that had most of those provisions in it, and I didn't understand until I was working with an attorney that like started explaining everything. So very basic knowledge, and I'd say I learned through that process a lot of what I would have wished I had beforehand of the foundation.
Okay, so interesting. So it sounds like almost kind of like mapping the important things that you wanted done to like which documents do that.
Yeah.
That was kind of fuzzy.
Yeah, because I had originally went the DIY route, which I think a lot of people like question whether or not to go the attorney route, or there's plenty of platforms that you can kind of DIY it.
Like software.
Yeah. And I'd say that one advantage I had was working where we work. So I knew that people DIY their finances too, but how much more knowledge y'all have as financial advisors and just different tactics, savings, all of that. And so I started to kind of question whether or not this was something that I had the expertise to do. And then through some Googling and some tough, hard truths through people having bad experiences DIYing and it not being legally binding.
I think people might find that interesting. Like, so Jill works in a wealth management office. Like, I mean, financial planner literally down the hall. And she did not go the DIY route. I feel like if people maybe would think, like, if anyone is well positioned to do the DIY route, it would be Jill, right? But you actually kind of, after you learned a little bit about what goes into it, you're like, no, I'm not going the DIY route. That might be surprising to some people.
Yeah, I did have y'all as a resource, but at the end of the day, I think it's more seeing how many people try to DIY what y'all do that I thought y'all are professionals for a reason, and there's a professional for estate planning. And at the end of the day, your finances are so important, and so is my estate plan. And I don't want it that if I were to pass and it's already a hard time, that anything wasn't actually done correctly.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so headed into it, probably more, I'm my opinion, probably more knowledgeable than your average Joe on the street, just because of working in our office, but certainly not like super knowledgeable. But went into it. Then what was your experience from that point?
A lot of learning, because I didn't even understand what all you'd have to decide, and I knew that I would have to make decisions that are hard because you are planning in the event that you pass and maybe even your husband's passing. So then it's like completely outside of your immediate family. But I think not realizing how many decisions you have to make, and it, for my husband, he felt like he told me that I was excited to plan our death. And that's funny because I am a planner, so I do enjoy planning, but there is a part where you kind of almost want to bury your head in the sand and not make any more of those decisions. And when you do your estate plan, you can't do that. It's completely making you choose, and you choose alternates and everything like that. And so it was a learning process, and I could not recommend it more, especially if you're a parent.
Really? Because it kind of sounds like a bummer when you describe it. Like, I'm obviously joking. I think it's something really important to do, but truly, I think that's maybe like one of the turnoffs that people don't want to do. They kind of want to put it on the back burner because it does involve thinking about your mortality and then making tough decisions. Tell us more about like all the kind of different decision points that you guys had to go through. Not obviously the decision you made, but the different types of decisions people can expect to have to make.
Well, I'll say my final straw where I finally started taking it serious and put pen to paper, if you will, was somebody had posted a GoFundMe because their husband had unexpectedly passed, and they had nothing prepared. And I thought, right now, as it stands, my husband wouldn't know any of my passwords. We wouldn't, there's a lot of stuff that you keep separate and you don't even think about. And so that was kind of like my biggest fire to my feet, if you will, was seeing other people completely distraught in a time where they should really be able to think of their family and deal with that aspect and grieve. And instead they were having to think of all of this. So my process was, first, he actually worked on my trust because we decided I wanted a trust since my son is not even a year old. He has a lot of life to live. And ideally, we may have children in the future. So I wanted all of that set up for them and fund the trust. So I found an attorney that would put my deed of my house into the trust and all of those things. And the reason why is so they can avoid the probate process. And I chose a trust. I won't go too big into details because at the end of the day, everybody's situation's different, but I chose it to safeguard the assets and like none of that becomes public in a probate process. Yeah. And I can create a bunch of provisions since my kid has so much life to live. Yeah. So we started working on the trust first. And in that, I realized that I had to not only pick one guardian, like one family,
all
but
the alternates. That's hard enough, right?
Yeah. You had to, so you pick ideally your spouse or their other parent first. And then after that, I had two families that I had to write down. And that process, me and my husband went to the drawing board, honestly, for weeks. Yeah. Because you start thinking of your family members and how they would raise your kid and if it would be the way you'd want and all of that. And so it created hard conversations that did suck.
Yeah.
but we needed to have those, and it needed to be in a time where we're not emotionally charged, we're not distraught, nothing bad has happened. And then we had those conversations with the people that we chose, so they knew what responsibility we were asking of them, and that was actually really hard too.
Wow.
Because in that process, people found out that they weren't being chosen, and it brought a lot of hard conversations that needed to be had, but I definitely would have avoided them for a very long time.
Well, yeah, I mean, the kind of the question that stands out to me in all this is like, obviously there's all these different decisions and choices you have to make. Like, who would you want to take care of you? Who would you want to take care of your kids? But the overall question on all of that is like, who would you want to be the one to actually decide all of those things, right?
Yeah.
And that is the process of estate planning is you and your loved ones deciding now, today of sound mind and everything, all of these different decisions, as opposed to someone else, right? A court or a probate process, or deciding all of this for you. So okay, tough decisions. Went with the so I guess in deciding to go with the trust, right? And obviously everyone's different. I guess would you say like that kind of was the role of the attorney who assisted you of what are the decision points of which documents and which structure I need?
Yes, because he originally had talked to me about that, like I don't necessarily need one. And then he talked about my wishes. And it's the same that y'all do when you sit down with clients and you talk about what they're wanting, and it kind of adjusts the plan. And so when I told him what I was hoping for my family, he said, okay, then a living trust does make sense in this case.
Okay. Yeah. What, as you kind of got into the process, were there other topics that came up that you still are like curious about or have questions about or anything?
He would bring up random things that he could add in that would help safeguard people and our assets and our children, and then also tax things. And so that's why it's always great to have a professional, is because there's things that he did and he wrote into it that I would have never known how to do. And I do not think DIYing it would have had that, because he adjusted it based on my plan and like everything that we have in there. So that was very interesting. But it really, the main thing was all the decisions that you have to make, and then having someone help you just say, okay, you have to make this, and this person has to be named, and then all these people after, I'd say is like one of the biggest pieces of it. That is the only thing that I'd say you want to know beforehand. Like you want to have those conversations, in my opinion, beforehand with your spouse.
Or as part of the process. Or you saying like already go ahead and do all that legwork before you speak with the attorney? Or
I would say go ahead and already start having those conversations, because even if you decide to DIY it, you still need to have those decisions made, especially if you're just going to do a will. You can put all of your, requests in there. But yeah, I'd say that was the thing that me and my husband, if I could go back and do it again, I would have just started that off earlier. And, I think it'll change for people. So had I not had a son yet, I was just talking about future kids, it may have been different people, because things change.
Right.
And so that would have been a conversation that you can't do it too far in advance, but.
Right. Yeah. And then obviously, so you set this up here and now, right? And then obviously into the future, like life could change, there's other modifications that you could make, but I guess, at any time you could always either go back to the same attorney or another, and you have this structure in place and you can easily adapt it as needed if your wishes do change, right?
Yeah. And that's a nice thing too, is that they kind of guide you in provisions that you can do that kind of will cover future changes in life. But yeah, he told me that we should be revisiting it at least every 5 years. But if anything, life event changes, then for sure then.
Yeah. So yeah, okay. So kind of putting my financial planner hat on, that's kind of like a role that we often fill for clients, which is like, obviously we're not attorneys, we don't draft these documents. But we'll pair, a client or send them off to the estate planning attorney of their choice or a referral from our office. And then they kind of get into all these different provisions and add-ons and things like that. And then sometimes they'll kind of circle back to us and go, what do you think? Hey, my wishes so well, because, right, I mean, we comprehensive planning, we know the client, we know their family, their wishes and all that. We're able to kind of not answer the question for them, but give them some context or some structure around how they might decide. And they can go back to the attorney. And a lot of times the attorneys are good at doing that as well. It's just we know the client so well at that point. It's a natural kind of we've even done, conference calls jointly with the attorneys. So that's kind of gives some context to like the traditional financial planner role
Yeah.
that you see, in our office too. So.
And that is where I got to dip into the lucky hat, where I do work with y'all and I can ask you any question and y'all can help guide me along the way. And I think
And that was a lot of fun too, by the way, because I will say, our approach is, like what recommendation would I make to a family member, to a close friend? And so here you come, strolling just up the hallway and go like, hey, here's what's going on. What would you do? Or like if you were me, and it's like perfect, like kind of a fact check to go like, yeah, that's the exact same approach I would take with a client. So it was a good overall kind of like
so
case
you're calling
study.
me a close
Guinea
friend.
pig. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. But no, it was a good, again, I'll use the term like kind of case study to go like, yeah, that's exactly like how I would advise someone, a client and or a close friend. And I was like, right, perfect alignment. It's great.
And I felt that way too. I got to experience a little bit of the financial planner hat, like helping me bring my whole plan together,
Yeah.
because you go beyond what the documents that they're creating for me. You're talking about all of my future plans. And ideally, it's not only in the event of passing,
Right.
And so that was very helpful.
Yeah. Okay, so let's say someone out there is watching this, they're on the fence, or like, estate planning, right? Or maybe this is the first time you even heard the term. What's something that you would tell them to kind of move it from the back burner to the front burner?
I'll say exactly what did it for me, which is in the event of your death, you don't want that what your family's having to worry about is your estate. You want them, especially if you have kids, to focus on that, or only if you don't have kids, their own grieving. And nothing that you could do better for them in the event of your passing than have it prepared. And on another note, not only just in estate planning, but I kind of touched on it with the GoFundMe, was life insurance. That's what made me finally bite the bullet with life insurance too.
Yeah.
And I put my trust as the beneficiary of my life insurance and then my provisions to it. And so I think ultimately all of those, just like if there was ever a time, I think for sure, if you have kids, but any big life events, I think that it's definitely worth doing, at least talking to a financial advisor about what all you should have in place is very helpful.
Look at you. You've got the life insurance, you got the estate plan. It's like, goodness gracious. Yeah, you're really adulting these days.
Yeah.
Congrats.
I definitely feel that way. I think once you have a kid, you're like, oh, wow, I'm the adult.
Correct.
Yeah, I have a whole being that I am responsible for.
Yeah. Yeah. And obviously not to say, there's people that are connected to you and depend on you, whether or not you're married, whether or not you have children, right? So it's important for everyone to go out and get done. But like a big life transition, like, motherhood, that'll certainly get you up and get it done. So
Yeah. I'd say even if you have a house, all of it's worth it to avoid the probate process. I think one thing y'all said too that really helped me was, do you want to decide or do you want the government to decide?
right.
And
that'll
I-
get a good red-blooded Texan, to go.
I did not want the government to decide what was going to happen with my assets or my family having to fight for anything that I had worked for that I wanted to go to them.
Yeah. Okay. So what else? What else am I not asking you that I should be asking you for the benefit of our viewers who are maybe thinking about doing this?
I think that a lot of people probably are wondering where to find an estate attorney, because that is hard. And we were fortunate that I just worked with one that we work with closely at the office. But I kind of would actually like to ask you, what would be something that you'd recommend them to find a good one from?
I'm a fan of the personal referral. Obviously, if you have a relationship with a financial planner, ask them, right? They'll know someone. But if not, I think I'm a fan of the personal referral. If you just kind of ask around in your network, and you don't have to go into detail, but it's like, hey, I'm really trying to get my affairs in order. I'm trying to be responsible. And then like, if you know of any estate planning attorneys, or if you know someone who does, I'd love to be able, and I'd say get a couple and call them and speak with them. And just like you would for any other, professional service, vet them, see, by and large, people do business with people they like. And so if you hit it off with them and you trust them and it's come from a personal referral, I think you're probably in good hands. But yeah, I think if you do kind of get on one of those calls or sit in, in a meeting with someone like that, just kind of ask them their approach and like how they would go about advising you. And you can, the gut check, I think is important. There's all kind of different, studies out there on this of like how we decide to trust people and things like that. And I think, if you just sit with someone, you go, you trust them, and someone I trust also trust them, like that's usually a good indicator, but you obviously want to do your due diligence Um, yeah, I think that's how I'd go. Part of all of this, which is really interesting, is this is why I wanted you to come on. It's like the curse of knowledge.
Yeah, very true. There's a lot of
It's a
times we'll
thing.
go over topics and you'll record a video and I'll be like, okay, well, as someone that doesn't understand that topic, here's what I would have left over wondering.
100%. Yeah. So like, it's hard for me to even answer the question that you should ask because I can't unknow all the attorneys that I know and the
Yeah,
process and
yeah.
things. So, but like that, just kind of off the cuff. That's kind of what.
But that's a
what I
good
do.
point. You like them and they're able to explain things to you where it makes sense because estate planning can get very complex
Yeah.
for some people. I mean, not everybody, but estate planning can get complex. And I'll tell you, the attorney I went with, he explains things so thoroughly and he probably goes into too much detail. But I'm somebody who likes that. And
Yeah.
you have to find the person that you like.
Yeah.
And of course, like any professional, I'm sure you've experienced this, they can move it along. I can say, okay, I don't think that applies. So
Yeah,
let's,
yeah.
but I think that is very important. So that's a great point that you brought up is finding someone not only that you like, but also that the way they explain things works
It
for
works
you.
for you. Yeah. But seriously, like if someone's sitting there watching this and they go, well, no, that actually does sound like a bummer. I don't want to have those hard conversations and I don't want to do this. Like red light. What would you say to them? I guess like what, obviously this is an important process. It does involve some challenges. What would you say to kind of speak to that concern?
So my personality and my perspective on it was I want to have these hard conversations with them so then they're not finding out when I've passed. I don't want that to be how they find out. I want to be able to navigate their feelings and explain what I was thinking.
Yeah.
And then hopefully they have many years and maybe never this comes into act. But you don't actually have to tell the people who are not going to be, but here's how I thought of it. I don't want somebody to try to fight for, say, my child, say that they were upset they weren't a guardian, try to take it to court and fight for
Yeah.
them and put anybody in unnecessary stress. I would rather have had that hard conversation and gotten past that point. And honestly, everybody may have it as a shock and they may not receive it initially well, but at the end of the day, it is your wishes. And they'll have to come to respect that. So I still think push through those hard conversations, have them. I would rather them be hearing it from me or my husband if it was his family and know now than find out upon my passing when there's so much already emotional stuff going on and it could trigger in a different way than you're wanting, when right then it should really be the focus of your family, their grieving, and maybe your children.
Yeah, and the other thing too is, if you can kind of just tell someone, "Hey, we did not choose you to be the guardian, but if you mind your manners," you just kind of dangle that out there. That's all.
Tell them that they're on a plan and that if they can act
you're
right.
on a short list. We'll reevaluate. Yeah.
That's a good one. Well, I'd say that I think the hardest one is if you're not choosing your parents to be the guardians. And my decision on that was not because I thought anything negative about either side of our parents. It was age. It's completely just decided on. My kid right now is not even one. So he has, if I were to pass tomorrow, all of his life to rear. And I didn't want
Yeah.
that to be grandparents doing that. I want it to be another family similar to mine. And that's just my perspective. Everybody has their
Yeah.
own people that they have. And it's just good to start thinking of it and having those conversations. But I like that. I like that note. You can
It's
kind
just
of,
something to keep in mind.
yeah. Performance plan.
Okay, so I mean, maybe this isn't a strictly speaking financial or even legal, but navigating those conversations, the relationship dynamics. Again, if maybe that sounds like a deterrent to even do this at all, what guidance would you give if you venture to do so for people who are looking at getting into that?
I'd say you can create your whole plan and you may never have to use it. So if you don't want to have those conversations with who you picked or who you didn't, then just make sure that you have everything very legally binding. And so there's no questions asked. And at the end of the day, your hope is that none of this ever has to be done, that
Right.
you live long enough. So I wouldn't sweat that too much. If that truly is the thing, the roadblock of you doing it,
Yeah.
then they don't have to know. And then if you want to take the complete opposite perspective, you won't have to deal with it when they find out if you wait to tell them that way. So I'd say that if you have such a relationship that that's too hard to get past, there's an option to just never tell them. They won't know, and hopefully you never have to use this plan.
Yeah, but in any case, don't let that be the reason to stop you from planning.
No, because if you know that your wishes would be for them not to be it, then
You
you
gotta
need
spell
to
that
have
out.
that somewhere. Yeah,
Correct.
because if they're going to be shocked by that news, then they obviously thought that they would be a contender, and you need to have your wishes well known.
Let's kind of jump into the process, right? So you decided you want to do this. What was the actual kind of timeline of how you actually accomplished it?
So I decided I wanted to do it, but like I said, I kind of was looking into the DIY route originally. So I went on to the internet. I kind of looked up all of them. I saw the pricing was the first thing, which a lot of people are going to deal with trying to decide because it can be and usually is more expensive to use an attorney. So I went through that. And then, once I had decided to use an attorney, I used one we already knew.
Yeah.
I actually did do a consultation with another one I had found online that had
Smart.
good reviews. I just wanted to kind of see
Yeah.
how two personalities would be. And I ended up going with the one that our firm usually works with. And after that, he kind of led the process. He
Okay.
told me, he sent me a draft of all of these items I needed to decide. So trustee.
Kind of like a worksheet of sorts of like, yeah. Okay.
And I just had to fill it in. And that actually, to me, was one of the hardest pieces because that's where they start asking you to make all your decisions.
That's all the decision making, right?
Yeah. And so I filled all of that out. And then I got my first draft. And then I read through the first draft. And he pointed out places where he said, I used a language that I think covers what you're wanting, but look it over and we can change it based on what you want. And
Can I add that
Yeah.
draft? Was it kind of overwhelming?
yeah, it's definitely overwhelming.
Okay.
You're not expecting how many pages they will draft just for the first draft.
Exactly.
And it's because they know it's a legal document. They need all of this to be covered, and these things have been
Bulletproof.
fought.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I respect that. But yes, he had called me a couple times and was like, have you had a chance to look at this? And I'm like, wow, I'm still digesting like the first 2 pages.
And I'll just jump in and say that a lot of times is another role that the financial planner will step in. And because again, we don't draft the documents and do all that, but we've seen so many of them, we can kind of like hit the highlights and
Yeah.
kind of confirm that the highlights are what you put on the worksheet. Or at the very least, just kind of highlight, hey, you might go back and ask them about this or that.
No, that's a great
So-
point, and definitely recommend, because at the end of the day, it's a lot of legal jargon, and
Yeah.
I feel like y'all see that more and it's less like, overwhelming. And I honestly think maybe even having another set of eyes that does kind of know your wishes would be a good way to do it.
Not like in a stepping on toes kind of way,
Yeah.
but it's almost like and I've even used the term translate. Like,
Yeah, I can
we
see that.
don't write the things, but we can translate and go like, hey, here's what would happen if X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
And again, we're not saying like you should change or anything like that. It's just trying to confirm your understanding of what you have in that document.
No, and that's good, especially because sometimes with estate planning, you're trying to rush through it because it can be painful. It's
You
a
wanna get it
painful
over with.
process. Yeah. And
Right.
also like once if you wait like me, where my son's already almost a year, you kind of are like, oh crap, now that I've made the decision, like let's get going.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great idea, is to have like somebody else take a look at it and be able to make sure that you understand everything that you've put in place. So
Yeah, I interrupted. So worksheet,
yeah.
initial draft. Okay.
initial draft, then I looked over it, and there were just some things that once you read, you start thinking of other things.
Yeah.
And I may be an anomaly. I maybe put a little more provisions than the usual person.
No comment.
It's my personality. So there were some things that I wanted in there, my wishes, that we went ahead and added. And I'd say reading some of the stuff made you start to think of some of those items. But then other than that, he would just go back and he talked to me about like, I put this here and I think that answered what you wanted, or
Okay.
this will help you with tax savings. So anyways, we went through 3 drafts.
Okay.
Yeah, so 3 drafts, and it was really only changing like one section each time just to help.
You know what we're gonna do for a follow up on this episode? I'm gonna sit down with the attorney and we're like, what was it like working with Jill?
I'll be like, is that not privileged information?
Finally got it the way you like it, and then
And then we moved on to the will. So
Okay.
then we did a pour over will, which actually that had the guardianship in it, which I did not understand going into the process. So if you're like not doing a trust, it's okay. That's in your will. So it went into the will. And so then we worked on that, and it just really needed to match what we
Yeah.
were then and reference the trust and where everything was going. I'd say the will was the easiest part.
yeah.
Once I started the other part and I did that first sheet, that was great. And then now we're working on like power of attorney.
And for people who are watching and are like, what are those terms? So a pour over will, like usually if you have the trust kind of becomes the centerpiece of the financial plan, and really the the will then just kind of goes like, put everything in the trust. And so for people who don't have a trust, their will may be a little bit more involved. Just for people who are watching and go like, that wasn't my experience. That could be the reason. So
that 100% has to be the reason, because I will say like almost everything was in the trust, and then the will's just saying reference the trust. But it does state the guardianship.
Right.
So, and then after that, we're doing the medical power of attorney and those items, and those are so important too. It's another thing that I just needed to have in place. And I think seeing other people deal with it with aging parents, all of that kind of just sets a reality in, because you can listen to someone talk all day long. You should have this, you should have a savings, all of these other things, but a lot of people need to experience it. And I feel like I experienced it through other people.
Okay, so it kind of sounds like where you're at in the process now, I guess. Have you executed the documents yet, or is that something you still need to do? Like signing them and everything?
Yeah, I have not signed them yet.
Okay.
We have it scheduled for him to actually come into our office because we have a notary on staff. And then you have to have witnesses for the will, I believe. Witnesses for the will.
Yeah, there's a couple of the documents that do require witnesses. Some don't. Some are notaries, some are not. And that's the other part of like working with an attorney. Because if you go onto a software and it just spits out all these documents, then you're like, now what? The attorney will come, sit with you, sign here, do that, witness, and it's like, okay, that's done right. So, okay, it sounds like it's still...
Well, and then I have to deed my house into the trust, which I'm not doing, the attorney's doing. And that's another item that it's like, when I started looking at DIY, they were telling me that they would give me the instructions to do it. And I was like, ooh, that's a lot of responsibility, and I want to make sure it's done right.
Yeah, I mean, especially with the trust. I can't tell you how many trusts I've seen that are not funded. I get like the binder and like, this is all my, in a new client, right? So we're reading up, there's all my estate documents that go, great. So what is in the trust? And they're like, huh? And like a lot of times I've seen like the attorney will give you all the documents, execute everything. And it's like this, almost this disclaimer that says like, you must fund the trust. Some attorneys help with that. Some don't. Some just kind of caution. So I'm glad that's on your radar.
It's definitely a question you should ask your attorney then when you're looking at, will you help me fund it? That's why we did also the pour over will helps make it where all of the assets that I forget to fund into the trust will go into it. That's
kind of your safety net, right?
Yeah, and that's nice too, because the thing is, maybe if I'm not a good client 10 years from now, I'm not revisiting it, and then there's new assets, and I want those to go into the trust and all those provisions to be in place.
Now, if you're meeting annually with your financial planner and they're checking your beneficiaries and all that, you have another set of eyes. And it's shameless plug. So,
it's a good one though. I know we send out an email every year, like update your beneficiaries, look at all of that stuff, and it's great. And you should be visiting everything to make sure no changes are needed. And people maybe have been on better behavior and they can get added into things.
Exactly. So even in our conversation today, Jill mentioned a number of the other videos that we've recorded on this topic of estate planning, kind of what is estate planning, the basic documents and what they do and how to go about it. So we'll link to those. I think that's a good place to kind of dive in if you want to learn more. Obviously, we're a resource for you as well. You can call our office, set up a consultation, happy to kind of sit down and look at your situation. I would just say, just take action. Don't let all the nitty gritty and the everything. You don't have to pre-plan everything, which as a planner by nature, I'm literally a financial planner. I feel like I had to have it all lined out before I take any action. This is one of those things. There's professionals, either financial planners, state attorneys. Jump right in, speak with them, take action, and don't let kind of the details prevent you from doing this really important thing in your life. So anyway, appreciate you guys taking the time to watch the video. And as always, give us a shout, shoot us a question, and we'll record a video on any other topics that you're interested in.